Reuniclus is being suspect tested in Gen 5 OU finally. With me here to discuss this is Peng once again. Say hi, Peng.
Hi everyone.
So, Peng is once again here with his level headedness balancing out my emotionally invested, agitating dogma, so I will have to adopt a more rational position. So, before we get into that, because I am pro Reuniclus ban and he is anti Reuniclus ban, we will quickly recap how we got here. So, Cloister was banned, and then some people started voicing the sentiment that had been going around in black and white circles, which was that Reuniclus should be next. It is the most singular thing you can point to and say, we got to get rid of this thing because it is a problem. And if you take it out, it's not like you're completely overhauling what the game is. As opposed to if you ban Drizzle, for example, you get a completely different game. The idea is Reuniclus is not only busted, but you will not completely uproot the metagame we have by getting rid of it. Why is Reuniclus busted? Well, you can refer to other videos I've made on the subject. About a month ago, I made one that was called Reuniclus should be banned from Gen 5 OU. Here, the F is why. And that probably has all the details. I've railed about it for so long that at this point, if you still need to understand why Reuniclus is in this situation, it's because passive damage is nuts, and with its own immunity to passive damage and its insane bulk, Calm Mind Reuniclus outlasts everything. And pretty much the logical point of many a black and white endgame in terms of team building, it should always end in a Reuniclus war because it is simply the most optimal. It will be able to take on pretty much everything because all it takes besides Calm Mind and Recover is some tweaking of its moveset. So HP Ice first, but F Gliscor that might try to outlast it and boost on it. All sorts of things. It just naturally is insanely difficult to go the distance against, and even attempts to limit it through things like Pursuit are spectacularly unreliable. So as a result, and I will leave these posts which describe Reuniclus's brokenness in the pinned comment if you would like to read them at your leisure. So after this, the council got together and once again put together a survey and surveyed the player base, and the player base responded with 80% approval for a Reuniclus Suspect. I haven't seen a player base this united over something in a long time. I couldn't even tell you. So, now we know why Reuniclus is being suspect tested. I personally subscribe to the logic of its suspect test and push that further to say this is too much, it is unreasonably difficult to deal with. Now, Peng here has his own opinion, which he posted in the thread. So again, you will be able to read that. It's linked in the comments if you'd like. But now we will go back and forth and see where it lands us while Reuniclus packing replays go on in the background. So Peng, feel free to state your position, which is not against the norm, I would say, but because people tend to be they tend to exaggerate a little. It's kind of funny because I've been a very anti-Reuniclus for a long time, and now suddenly masses of people are coming out and saying this is the most obvious Uber ever. And even though
Yeah,
I agree that it's an Uber, of course, but I was like, where was this enthusiasm so long ago? Or even more recently. So I know people tend to knee jerk and be a little over the top with it. So what's your stance on this whole thing?
yeah. I think that's probably right. I think as soon as something sort of actually gets close to getting suspected, that there's almost like this bandwagon effect where everyone kind of gets on board, and it's why you have to not be too hasty with suspect like absolutely anything, because you can kind of like encourage people to vote for pro ban or whatever. People just like the whole suspect process and everything. Reuniclus I think is really marginal. I think anyone that's saying it's like a really blatant Uber is
Sorry, say that again. You cut
online
out.
though.
You said something about
And similarly, as I say in my
you said
post,
something about it being a blatant Uber, and then you cut out for a
not even
sec.
that good. Anyone saying that I think is like
Yeah.
equally delusional. I think everyone should really be on that tightrope of this is like potentially one of the most broken Pokemon in the game. Which way do I slightly lean on it?
So since you cut out
My
for a second,
stance.
You cut out for a second. So
Yeah.
basically, going too extreme either way is unreasonable, is what you're saying.
I think so. We've had Reuniclus for 14 years.
Hmm.
You know, it's done largely the same sort of thing in that time. We can talk a bit about how the structures have changed. I think it's being abused in a very different way today than it has been for much of its history. With kind of, it's much more paralysis focused these days, and back in the day it was, and even a few years ago, it was much more burn focused and poison focused. That's the support that has changed, and it seems like now the optimal way of running it is to run it with loads of T wave support. Um, but by and large, Reuniclus has been doing the same thing for kind of 14 years. The idea that we've just had a complete blind spot on it that entire time is like, that's bullshit, frankly. It's very, very good. It's not like a really, really obvious Uber, but if you do think that the spikes and Latios ness of the metagame is problematic, like the reason things go in that direction is it's a lot of it's down to Reuniclus, and so it is the poster boy of the archetype and the thing that you would want to ban if you don't like the element of the game.
Because the whole
I
reason you
think, but the
sacrifice
idea that
your
it's like
Latios, the whole reason you sacrifice your Latios is to enable Reuniclus. It's because it's so much more consistent than just going all in on Alakazam or whatever else. Not that you can't do that, but Reuniclus is so sturdy that there's only a couple things that stand in its way, and that's why you're willing to sacrifice your Latios
yeah
just to land a T-Wave on a T-Tar. My God, because it's just that game breaking.
yeah exactly yeah exactly. It's just yeah, it's a very potent abuser of a lot of the worst things in the game, be it T wave and spikes and all that sort of stuff, knockoff and things. It's the best late game abuser of those sort of slow burn strategies, and um, that riles people up. And the teams that we have with it at the moment are like particularly disgusting. I have to kind of admit that they are really horrible to play against. But in my opinion, I don't think they are too overbearing. I'm really on the fence. I could be swayed to vote ban on it. At the minute, I don't have voting requirements myself. I need to hop on ladder and sort it. At the minute, I don't think it's overpowering to deal with. And a lot of time when people kind of complain about it, particularly those who are like low or mid skill players, I legitimately think it's a skill issue. I think Reuniclus is like a really skill intensive Pokemon to play with and play against. In contrast to other things that we voted on. That's not to say I don't think it's problematic. I think there are elements of it I think could push me to vote ban on it, but at the moment, I'm just not there. Is kind of the long story short of it.
So, um, what's holding you back from it? Because I personally am of the school of thought that Reuniclus was first brought up as a suspect in 2011. And Dice even
Yeah,
mentioned this in his post, and it was doing pretty much the same thing that it was doing back then. And then it went through these phases where, oh, it's actually not that broken, which is why I agree with you in that it's not the most obvious Uber in the world. You know, it's not Genesect or
yeah,
Landorus or something like that. And that, yeah, there are times where, oh, this thing actually doesn't seem so bad. But the fact is, it keeps coming back and keeps reinventing itself with just a little bit of change. And, you know, not just a minor tweak. And then suddenly it's ruining the metagame and changing it all, shaping it in its own image once again. So, uh, yeah, and we've then about 9 years ago, we had the first push for it to be really looked at as people realized, oh, spinning is impossible, spikes are busted, and then we changed the rules to bring back Excadrill to deal with Reuniclus largely in conjunction with spikes. And then people are like,
yeah,
oh, actually, Reuniclus is fine now. And then a few years later, people realize, oh, actually, nothing changed. Reuniclus is just as busted. And we went in these cycles over and over and over again. And eventually, we realized, hey, this thing is actually, it's just a fundamental issue. So I am personally of the conventional opinion, I guess, at this point, that I do think it warps the game in the team builder and in the battle. And I don't think that what it does defensively, yes, it's good into Scald, and, you know, I hate Scald, and it's good into some offensive threats. It can take a hit from things like D-Knight, whatever, but it's not nearly so essential to the fabric of the tier that we need to keep it around. And what it does negatively is far outweighs that. I think it's way too potent at warping the game into this whole spikes immunities above all else kind of deal. So where do you stand on not thinking that it should be banned? God, I hope you heard that.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure. So yeah,
okay, you did.
you
Good.
dropped out. Yeah, you dropped out a little bit, but I think I caught most of it.
Okay.
So the kind of thing I want to push back on that a little bit is that like I do think extra drills improved things significantly. I think it's very easy to like to say, well, Reuniclus is still really really good, therefore extra drill didn't fix stuff. But I would like to think about like Reuniclus is really quite good right now compared to how it was in like 2015. The comparison is like it's still like night and day. Like you have far more options to do with it today than you did back then in terms of not only extra drill matching up really really well 1v1 into Reuniclus because it can't always afford to run focus blast nowadays. Focus blast has a ton of issues, but also drill spinning and also drill sword dancing and the kind of partners that enables tend to be the team still that do the best against Reuniclus teams, to the extent that there has been like legitimately serious Excadrill suspect discussions and discussing whether we should like suspect Sandforce potentially because actually they make it too risky to run Reuniclus teams. So I don't like this idea really. Like Excadrill didn't fix anything, and Reuniclus is like peak endgame black and white, and there's never a reason to use anything apart from this because it's so optimal. Because we have people arguing for suspects that actually completely counteract that idea because they're too good against Reuniclus teams almost. You know what I mean?
Just
Yeah,
to
I
give
just
some
sort of
nuance
envision
to
a world
that,
where we.
I think like the extra drill did improve things. I think it's more that the way Reuniclus teams are built, since you're always responding to the Reuniclus, and the way it shifts itself is what makes it so untenable and unsustainable in the long term. And that kind of
Yeah.
reactivity is what I think is negative. But yeah, I do agree. Excadrill has made things better overall. It's just that we had to tweak the rules to bring it back in the first place. But water under the bridge. So yeah, sorry. Continue.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, where were we with that? What else was I
Yeah,
going
you
with
were
that?
saying we have suspects that aren't that are
Um,
too good into Reuniclus teams, and that
yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I mean that's all where the extra point is. I just think I disagree with the point that Excadrill hasn't improved things, and it's just as like Reuniclus is as good as it was in like 2015. Because I think that is like not close to the truth. I think we've got better at abusing it, but like um, yeah, I don't know. The biggest thing I have with Reuniclus though is that, and my post sort of alludes to this, as someone who builds and uses Reuniclus quite a lot, it's the Pokemon that people just seem to hand you wins against more than anything I've ever used in the tier. Especially now we have sort of Clefable support that's popped up, and we're better at using Hail and Blissey and stuff like that. The last 6 months have been sort of using Reuniclus. I've never had so many people just like completely hand me wins from like their inability to play the long game against it. Okay, and maybe that points to the Pokemon being like completely busted. Some people will go that way. I come out from the point of view as like this whole sort of T wave spam with Reuniclus as like as annoying as it is, people play suboptimally against it fairly often, and I would quite like us to see. I don't know. This is a really tough one because I think the Pokemon's really really good. I think it's not as good as people make it look very often. And I think if people kind of came to Black and White with more of an approach that you get from other generations, like those players would be better against play against Reuniclus. But the fact is, like Black and White is quite often so crashy bashy that a lot of our player base, not the top guys obviously, but like the mid tier players who are some of the very vocal pro ban people, they're just not good against playing against it basically, and the support is kind of how I feel about it. Um, yeah, because look, like a lot of the options for it are stuff that already finds its way onto teams, and people just leverage in not very good ways. Like An early knockoff into Reuniclus makes it so much easier to handle, but people rarely kind of go for it because they sort of see Reuniclus as like actually like a good knockoff switch in. But as a Reuniclus user, if it gets knocked off, all of a sudden I have to recover like far, far, far more often than I do if it's lefties, because that passive recovery, if I'm just pivoting Reuniclus in to get like 6% here and the 6% there, I can get away with like barely using recover and to use the free turns for calm minds instead. But if you don't have that option, you now have to click recover on a lot of the turns that you're pivoting in, and that makes a huge difference to how many openings the Pokemon gets. Underwave 2 is like a huge Reuniclus limiter. Anything that hits it for sort of like 40% puts it into a range where like crits are a legitimate threat. And that's always been one of like Reuniclus's biggest downfalls, is the fact that it is like so likely to get lucked. It can't sit up on Ice Beam, for example, because like over 12 Ice Beams, it's got like a 80% chance of getting frozen or crit or something. It just like it's so these are the kind of outs that you need to find against it. Trick is like a one-time thing, but like Latios is running Trick already if it's choice to Tarachi as well. Encore, there are a lot of things that are on a lot of teams already that are like among the best tools to do with Reuniclus. I think the issue with it is that it's very different to a lot of things we suspected, in that you can name the really hard counterplay and kind of why that suspect gets around it. Like Cloyster, you could point to like there's the hard counter in Slowbro, but it can run like Hidden Power Grass. Reuniclus isn't like that. Like there's I don't think you're putting like specific Pokemon on a team to beat Reuniclus, but you're using like all the tools in the game that are available, a lot of which really just sort of like slightly nerf it, and you use all of those as a plan to like stop it getting out of hand against you. And I think that's like a really important skill barrier in the game that shows like who is great and who is just good, is literally where I stand on it. Some people, I think, look at Reuniclus games and think they're really, really boring. I think they are like absolutely fascinating, and I think they are some of the highest skill intensive games that we see in the meta. Now, you may disagree with that.
So I agree and disagree with certain parts. I agree that I like the long games where you have to plan things out over the course of a battle. So I have no issue with that. My issue is more that the answers that every team has built into Reuniclus, I don't think they're really very good answers. Like knockoff, for example. Like no decent Reuniclus player is letting their Reuniclus eat a knockoff. Like if they switch it into Ferrothorn and let it get knocked off, I mean, they're just handing you the game. And then things like Encore, Politoed, I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to outlast. And I mean, the other options I just don't think are very good in general. Yeah, and I don't really see much. Like, what are people even throwing at it? Like, hyper offense is okay because Scizor, you can maybe get something going against a bulky team with Skarm. I mean, and then a bulky team with Skarmory comes along and kind of ruins that plan. So I mean, maybe you can get something going with like pursuing it, and then SD superpower with life form. I just find all the answers to Reuniclus to be frustratingly inconsistent one way or the other. Whether it's because they lose to Reuniclus itself, or because they're insufficient into Reuniclus teams. Like even something like, let's say, Excadrill, which is so good into so many Reuniclus teams.
Yeah, but like, this is the point. Yeah, saying that like good players aren't gonna let the Reuniclus get on.
Sorry, say that one more time. We have a connection issue here, folks, because I did not know that I was going to be at work today. And I got really annoyed because we were supposed to record this. So I brought the laptop and we were having a slow day, and therefore we are recording here. But because we are in an ancient Soviet-style building, the internet access is not so great here, which is why we're sometimes cutting out. Peng, let me know when you're back. But the idea... Peng? Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, well, we'll hang in here until Peng comes back. But the idea that I will restate when Peng returns is that... Let me pause this replay. That I personally find Excadrill and its ilk to be insufficient against Reuniclus. All right, how are we now, Peng? Good?
Yep, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Okay,
Cool.
so I was saying that I find Excadrill and things, while threatening to be sure, I still don't find them particularly effective into this general strategy of spiking and then Reuniclus. Because even something like Excadrill, I don't think the fact that Reuniclus sometimes doesn't run Focus Blast uh, to be really sufficient, because I think the standard is still Focus Blast for a reason, and you have to account for that. And while I certainly appreciate that Reuniclus cannot do everything at once, and I appreciate the skill-intensive nature of what it does, I think you can have those kinds of things. The promotion of the longer, more intensive wars of attrition without having this overwhelming factor that basically warps the game around it to an egregious extent, in my mind. Good lord, I
Yeah,
hope.
so
Yeah. Okay. There. Good.
I,
Good.
I think I think that's exactly.
Oh Jesus Christ. Okay.
Yeah,
Let's.
sorry, I keep losing it. Can you hear me now?
Good. Perfect. Go.
Yeah, so I think that's an exaggeration. The fact that like it warps the game around it to an egregious extent. I largely don't think it does that. I think the things that are good against it are things you're putting on teams anyway.
Mhm.
Like the majority of the top 20 Pokemon hit Uniclus incredibly hard and
Good lord.
put T-Wave on it, or
Sorry about
trick
that.
it, or encore it, or like
Sorry. Yeah.
or like generally aren't free entry points. I think you have to you have to really earn your entry with Reuniclus, and you have to earn the Calm Mind. This idea that it's free, like I don't know. And there's also this again, like if this was really like the completely optimal way to play the game, like Reuniclus would be seeing more than like 15% or whatever usage it is in SPR. I actually don't even think it's that high. Um, yeah, I just think I don't think it is this completely all-encompassing dominant thing that teams are completely bent over backwards to try and beat always. I don't think that's true.
I don't know about the usage thing, because
Yeah.
I understand where it's coming from, but remember, this is a player base that stopped using Reuniclus many times, not because it stopped being broken, but because they got bored with using it. And sometimes, or like in tournament settings specifically, you would think, oh well, it's super broken, let me use it all the time. But the reality is people will get paranoid about getting counter teamed, so even if something is insanely broken, they're not just going to spam it over and over and over again, because oh no, what if they specifically go out of their way to bring some cheese that will be bad against other things but good into the usual. So I mean, I understand where it's coming from. But the other thing I guess we disagree on is you're saying that, oh, everything in the top 20, does okay into it. And the thing is, I don't think it really does. I think if you look at a lot of the Pokemon that it's going to be facing off against, I don't really like their inability to really meaningfully. I mean, okay, if you're setting in Reuniclus at the beginning of a game, then no, it's not going to immediately sweep someone, off their ass. But as you're going to get hazards and wear the opponent down, which is going to be standard fare anyway, I find Reuniclus to be too restrictive in how it locks that game down. You can have a hazard-heavy game and be facing off against Alakazam, for example, probably its most direct point of comparison, and despite Zam's insane speed and power and all that, then because it is so much more, it doesn't have longevity, then it's going to be a lot more palatable. Whereas Reuniclus is a lot more. I think the window shuts in being able to deal with Reuniclus way too quickly, just by virtue of the standard play patterns of get the hazards and then go wild, and Reuniclus will take over everything else. Like if you weren't dealing with hazards, and this is why some people say deal with spikes instead, which I am sympathetic to, by the way. But I realize that's a pipe dream. But yeah, if you weren't being dug into by spikes constantly, something like Encore Polytoad would be a lot more manageable. But the reality is that it is going to find its way into all the status-heavy, bulky Pokemon, and it's going to harass pretty much everything because you cannot sit on it consistently. Not unless you're running Mew all the
Okay,
time. But yeah.
Okay, fine, but surely that speaks to you need to get better at playing into spikes, then, right?
Well,
There's a skill consideration
I
for
mean,
being good at like the Excadrill Skarmory matchup, right?
yes, I agree. But then the issue
Like
is
like like that's a tight interaction. The guys like Soul, Wind, and ABR win more often than they lose, and bad players lose more often than they win. There's a skill to being good with Excadrill into Skarmory, right?
right. But what I'm saying is, at
Okay,
that point,
maybe not SD Ironhead flinch your way through.
no,
I feel like
that's
just choosing
an
like the lefties and protecting and spinning right turn and pivoting like that's skill intensive. And good players find a way to not let Skarmory get up all the spikes, and then they don't have a Reuniclus switch in.
but that
Right?
assumes every team has either Excadrill or is going full on Superman, which is kind of the case. It's either full on Magic Art abuse or it's Excadrill. And I don't know how healthy that is. But, more importantly than that, to zero in on the whole thing, this just sounds like it's more an issue with spikes, which I personally agree with. Spikes are the devil and all that. But I know we can't deal with spikes. So, what I'm saying, why Reuniclus is crossing the border for me, is that it turns that spikes advantage into a guaranteed, or not guaranteed, but you get what I'm saying, too much of a high percentage win, much more, because if you were to convert a massive spikes advantage with Alakazam, for example, then you would still not have it nearly as automatic as Reuniclus. With Reuniclus, it is way more lights out. And the idea is that if you don't want to lose to Reuniclus, then you have to not lose to spikes. Which, I mean, fair, that's kind of what Black and White is about anyway. But not only is that an uphill battle, but I think it speaks to the fact that there is an issue there. And whether it's spikes or that Reuniclus converting the spikes to the win, whatever it is. But I still don't think it's healthy that you have to make such insane, maybe not insane, but make such concessions in order to have a fighting chance against it. Because otherwise, it is just going to shut you down. And I think it shuts you down way too easily. Good lord, I hope he caught that.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, good, you did.
No, I lost you a bit again. This has been a bit of a nut. Yeah, I don't know. At the moment, I like the identity of the game. Like the idea of any sort of spikes nerf is like completely unpalatable to me. Reuniclus, I just don't. I think it's the best spikes abuser. I think a lot of the trends that we see in team building, whilst they're not like specifically to deal with Reuniclus, I really counter the idea that like you absolutely must put this on a team to beat Reuniclus. I don't think it hugely warps the usage stats that much.
No,
but
I
like
don't think so
it is
either.
the best spikes abuser.
I don't think
Yeah,
that,
I mean,
to be clear,
like I was saying earlier, like the top 20 Pokemon.
to clarify, when I
Yeah, so what were
say
you saying?
when I say it warps the game, I don't mean it's forcing Spidef Jirachi or other bad counters on teams just to beat it. What I mean more is that
No.
it's so good at abusing
Yeah.
spikes and sand, or hail and sand, hail and spikes, that it more warps the game in the direction of this is the most powerful strategy. You must or you should be abusing this more often than not. And that's how you get these situations where, yes, there are many Pokemon that do okay against it in and of themselves, but by virtue of it being so optimal to go all in on this Reuniclus plan, then you wind up getting games where it is inevitable that your Reuniclus answer is going to be overwhelmed. That's how we get triple psychic. The Latios Zam Reuniclus thing. I mean, what else are you going to do into Latios and into Alakazam but lose what is on your team to deal with Reuniclus, at least partly. And that makes it so easy to clear the field. It's not just the spikes, but I mean, in conjunction with the spikes,
Again,
it's not even
the
spikes
evidence.
plus Reuniclus. So while Peng comes back to clarify that point more, I think it's just Reuniclus and friends. I think is the unspoken part of the whole affair, and I don't like the effect that has on the game at all. I think it's unhealthy to warp things into this direction of constant Reuniclus one-upsmanship, where let me leave the call with Peng and come back once again. All right, how are we now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Perfect. Yeah, I just have to leave the call sometimes, it seems. Okay, so yeah, I was just saying I don't think Reuniclus. It's Reuniclus and friends, not just Reuniclus, because if it was just Reuniclus, it wouldn't be so bad. But then again, it's kind of like saying, oh, Tornadus Therian, but with Drizzle. So
Yeah, exactly. So it's just for context, in case people like don't really know what Reuniclus does. We're now however long into the video, but like the way you traditionally abuse Reuniclus for like years and years and years would be to pair it with burn users. That way, you like basically very high level is that you just reduce Pokemon like physical attack and be chipping them, so that they are less likely to beat a special defense boosting Reuniclus. So it's like Love Plume Heatran and like Skull Gastrodon, Will-O-Wisp Gengar and stuff like that. You know, like Rotom Wash.
Jellicent, yeah.
Stuff that kind of yeah, exactly. Stuff that kind of lures in and burns things like Tyranitar, also hard counters like Scizor, a lot of those. That's kind of what the Gengar thing was doing, was luring T-Tar and Steels. Lures Jirachi as well. And yeah, like when those get burned, it's very difficult to actually handle Reuniclus. Things have moved away from there, and the partners are now a lot more Thunderwave Latios and Thunderwave Clefable, just to like get paralysis on stuff. And what that does is it put things slower than Reuniclus, so you actually get like the fast recover and the fast calm mind and the fast attack, which makes a big difference. And also just improves consistency by basically making like every turn that the opponent could crit, they've now got like a 25% chance they don't even move, you know? So you can kind of like recover loop and wait until you find an opportunity to calm mind or attack, and it's just a massive consistency booster, even against stuff that you wouldn't really think about. Like there's the very obvious cases where Latios paralyzes Tyranitar, and therefore Reuniclus can like focus blast it faster without taking a crunch. That's a really obvious one. But even like really small things like paralyzing a Jellicent means that you can calm mind before taunt, and it means you can also just like loop things and like calm minding Amoonguss means that you don't have, is it a speed tie between Amoonguss and Reuniclus? I think it is, right?
Yeah, it is,
Means that
unless
you
it's
don't
HP Fire
run the risk of
Amoonguss.
Stun Spore, calm minding. Yeah, exactly. Thunderwave into things like just like a bunch of like weird defensive stuff that you wouldn't think would be that important to paralyze. Just gives like that 25% chance that Reuniclus gets a free turn. That's still something that I don't think we fully adapted to yet in Black and White. I think that's still something fairly novel, and I think it's. I don't want to say it's premature to be like, this is obviously broken and we should ban it, because I see where the strategy is like generate, but I also think like we've never really had a Black and White metagame where you had to really worry about like defensive Pokemon getting paralyzed like this. Would you probably agree with that? Like, I don't think I've played a Black and White where like a Scum getting paralyzed was like potentially like a massive choke before.
No, I
Like normally
agree.
Scum, you don't huge.
No, I agree with
Yeah,
that.
it's
Even
it's a very sudden change to go from. Yeah, and like it's a really sudden change to go from, oh, I can just use Slowbro as a Thunderwave absorber. That's a bad example, but like, you know, whatever defensive Pokemon to like absorb Thunderwave, to
mhm.
shift from that being like a good thing to do to now being like, actually that's like a massive risk to do that and I shouldn't do it, and adapting about what the better lines of play are. Like for example, I think one of the big changes, like Hippowdon's got a lot better in the last year because of its like matchup into Thunderwave Clefable, because it doesn't care about knock really, doesn't
Mhm.
care about T Wave. So
Ish,
we are still
yeah,
kind of
but yeah.
adapting to the way we play around.
I think the issue I have with it, as Peng cuts out again, and I'm gonna rejoin the call. Um, oh, good lord, my internet just fell out. Okay, so once I'm back in with Peng, I will restate this. But my general point of contention here is that I don't think. How'd the call go? Discord, you tell me. Okay, are we back? Can we hear each other?
Yeah,
Okay,
we're back.
so my point of contention is that, like you mentioned, oh, now it's T Wave before it was burned. I think whatever state the metagame is in, it always winds up pointing towards Reuniclus, because the strongest strategies always wind up favoring some sort of Reuniclus endgame because basically everything enables it so well. I mean, now the focus is paralysis and hail and other newer things. But even if you were to take the old burn model, or if you were to take out burn altogether and just go the standard route of T-Tar, Gliscor, Skarmory, Latios, Zam, Reuniclus, then it's all kind of the same to me. I do agree that no, now you have to be more careful of T-Wave, but that kind of is the same idea that yes, while there is skill in avoiding, getting certain Pokemon knocked off, getting certain Pokemon T-Wave and all that, what I'm saying is the options are too limited. And it's for me, it's not really straddling that border anymore. To me, it has crossed that border a long time ago, where you have to be so careful with one of the very few things that answer. Because I don't think that most things, are gonna annoy it like a little bit. Like yes, okay, Rotom Wash can paint split against it or something. That's not really going to work long term, and Reuniclus does work in the long term. It outlasts everything. That's where the whole issue comes from. So now having to be afraid of things getting T-waved as well, and it's these lose-lose situations where like just take the example of T-Wave Latios, which is often cited. It's used on the ABR Hail team and the one you made as well. And what else are they going to do if not throw their Steel / T-Tar into the Latios, and then they get T-waved, and Colbert kicks in, and I mean they're going to get worn down facing the Latios itself. Forget the Reuniclus in the back, and while everything seemingly annoys it a little bit, I mean I don't really subscribe to that logic because that's why rain teams generally so spectacularly lose to Reuniclus if operated well. And the irony of this is right now we are watching on the screen Solwind versus whoever Gilberto Arenoso is from the Invitational, where Solwind has a Hippo rain team that is about to lose to, or sorry, a Hippo rain team, Hippo sand team that is about to lose to this rain. But by and large, I have found that your standard Keldeo, Thundurus, Latios type of deal, or swap out Keldeo for Mamoswine or whatever. Reuniclus is going to come in, even Sans Hazard sometimes, into Tentacruel on the spin, and it's just putting so much immense pressure on. Politoed can't do it forever. Scarf Scizor is the worst check imaginable. I don't know, I think it just forces these, from its teammates obviously, these kinds of really warping lose-lose situations that are best exemplified in the T-Wave Latios situation. But yeah, you were saying more about the paralysis focus. Or at least I hope he was. Oh no, Discord was cutting out again. Good lord. I apologize for this. The Pokegods really don't want this discourse because they know they would be too enlightened or something. The internet is fine. I don't know what's going on. Alright, so once again, to sum up, now that Peng is back, is that I think it's too win-win for the Reuniclus strategy, and that whether it's paralysis or burn or stacking psychics, whatever, and this is most exemplified in the case of Thunderwave Latios, where you send your Lati / Reuniclus answer into it because what else are you going to do? Sacrifice things to Latios and then it's going to win anyway. So yeah, and then you were saying about the Thunderwave of it all.
Yeah, I've kind of lost track of where we are, but yeah.
So you were saying about how we have to watch out for walls getting paralyzed, which is very novel to Black and White.
Yeah, I think you have to be smarter about where you let things like that fall. Like I think when Clefable first kind of picked up, that was the first time we had like a knockoff T-Wave thing that DPP's been dealing with for like a decade at this point. And that's like admittedly very hard to switch into, but you just have to be a lot more careful and to team build in a way that you're not going to lose to that. And I don't think we're short on options for doing that. Like I think both Hippowdon and Gliscor, which are already two of the best ground types in the game, are like very, very strong at doing that. I think things like Garchomp and Mamoswine as well fit onto like tons of teams already, and they're both like really, really scary for Clefable teams. Like That team has Bronzong, still doesn't enjoy facing Mammoth Swine. That's a fact. Like Bronzong does not live forever. Landorus T again is like endlessly annoying for that sort of thing. If you get up in the hazard game at all, then Lando Rotom like really annoys that six. That the six with Clefable or Reuniclus that we kind of keep on going back to. I think there's like tons of options for like these ground type pivots in the tier, which are all like strong enough into that sort of concept. The issue just comes in where you let knockoff hit the wrong thing or like T-Wave hit the wrong thing. And I think with time we will just like learn to play that better. And this isn't even talking about here. We're talking about like quite passive ways of playing against that. The thing that team hates more than anything is actually just playing against like a good offense, like a proper Rain offense. That team really hates. We talk about Reuniclus hating playing against Rain, but realistically, that team really hates Thunderous. Hates a lot of Keldeo. Hates like any sort of like Scizor Rain, which we've seen an uptick in. Like loads of Rains are like really potent to that team. Yeah, this is just where I stand. I think it legitimately is like a potent team that's only overbearing in the hands of a player that is like a lot better than you, which I think is a good thing.
I agree with.
I think good players should have. Yeah.
No, I agree that if it should reward the better player, and if you can't match its level, then sure. But I'm not even talking about specifically that example of Reuniclus team. I just mean more like the Latios thing, like pairing Latios with Reuniclus alone. I mean, shutting down the thunderous avenue of Rain, and then suddenly it just completely reversed, and it's Reuniclus and Latios feeding into each other and creating those kinds of win-win situations for the Reuniclus team. And that's what I take issue with. I don't really think we have very many good answers into that. Like, yeah, Scissor, like, again, I just keep going back to Gliscor, Skarmory, and then the three Psychics alongside Sand. And I think that is suffocating for pretty much the whole metagame to deal with. And I find that kind of strategy, I mean, it was good when people weren't using Reuniclus during those periods where people decided, you know what, I'm just not going to use Reuniclus because it's bored. And then the entire metagame collectively decided to not use Reuniclus checks. And just, there was this like strange kind of mass agreement to just not bring it or something. I don't know what happened. It was a strange hallucinatory period. But then you would realize, oh, actually, it's the same issue as it's always had. And you could throw, and yes, so my point being that you could throw these kinds of Latios Alakazam style spikes things at people, and they would be very good, but they required a lot more execution. And Reuniclus, on the other hand, I think is a lot more not automatic, not by a long sight, but it rewards far too much to be balanced, in my opinion.
So what I think the takeaway of my point really here is, I'm just looking at the usage stats from SPL this year, and I'm not going to dwell on the fact that Reuniclus is 15th, it's 13% usage. I find that low, honestly, for a Pokemon that we talk about being the optimal way of playing the game. I understand the boredom argument. I think if Reuniclus was that...
In fairness, look at Cloyster. Look at
but
Cloyster's usage too. Cloyster wasn't used a lot, and we just banned that.
Yeah, but Cloyster was never considered an optimal way of playing the game. Cloyster was a matchup fish.
Okay, fair enough.
I don't think I'm comparing those. Nobody was ever saying Cloyster's the best way of playing the game. The issue was that like defensive cores at that time were like excessively weak to Cloyster in a way that you couldn't really tech for reasonably, especially when it could run mixed sets. It became literally like you'd have to either not use a ground type stealth rocket, or you had to run like a Garchomp tier Scarfer plus something like Slowbro, and that was the only way to cover off like physical ice shard and mixed hidden power grass at the same time. Or you just don't use Landorus, which is like unviable. That's like a long term approach.
I understand, but like if we're talking,
Reuniclus is different because like.
Oh, hang on, you cut out again.
No, I haven't. I'm just letting you talk.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So if we go down like the top 20 used Pokemon, okay? Number one's Latios. Do you think Latios is good or bad against Reuniclus?
Bad. I don't think it's good at all.
Bad? Okay.
No.
Sets
we mentioned Trick, and it doesn't even get to use Trick. like half the time. Like we even like recently we even talked about how you can't even use Specs Latios half the time, or not can't, but don't want to be using Specs Latios half the time. And
Sure.
then like Scarf is obviously the most vulnerable thing in the world. And then we have a bunch of utility sets which are basically useless. Like the most they'll do
No,
is
no, no, no,
like
no, no,
T
no, no,
Wave
no.
or Roar. I mean,
Both Thunderwave, yeah, both Thunderwave and Raw Colbert sets are really good against that team.
but you also don't want to rely on Latios, the Reuniclus answer, because again, T-Tar Pursuit, and that's the whole thing. Reuniclus's whole deal is that whatever you wind up doing into it, whatever you wind up throwing at it, rather, is so easily dealt with by its usual teammates. Like you can say, oh, Excadrill, oh, Encore, Politoed, whatever. It's nothing that it can't handle, and nothing that
Sure,
it
but
doesn't
that's not even
regularly
the big
handle.
team that's like, yeah. Sure, but like I would argue that the Trantar Reuniclus is not even like the pairing that we're seeing right now. We're seeing Hail and we're seeing like Powdon stuff.
I mean, just because that's what we're seeing now doesn't mean that it's going to be any less viable. If anything, post Cloister ban, the standard Reuniclus structures get better. Because they don't worry about
Okay.
getting cheesed. I think it's more.
Okay.
That's my point. It's not that. Yeah, well, right now we're seeing hail paralysis. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the standard Reuniclus structures haven't have gone down in viability or something. Like I really don't see a reason why standard
Okay.
Lottie Zam.
Uh,
Yeah, but yeah, go ahead.
okay, so we have Latios then. I would personally argue that like every Latios set except for 3 attack recover has like at least some is minimum 50-50 into Reuniclus, if not favored. I think a lot of them are favored with Trick or Thunderwave or whatever.
But
I'm not saying
there's
that's like a long-term solution, but it's a Pokemon that has slots that
that do
Reuniclus is scared
something.
of, which
Okay,
is
sure.
the point here. I'm going to go down.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to go down the top 20 and talk about which Pokemon on their best set have a tool that really annoys Reuniclus.
Okay.
Right?
Sure.
So Latios has Colbur Thunderwave, Colbur Roar, Trick, and Calm Mind. And the Calm Mind is like, it depends who gets the first Calm Mind in that situation, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
Tyranitar,
yeah.
obviously Tyranitar, it's not like a long term solution, but it's very good into Reuniclus, you would argue.
I would say no because T-Tar needs so much Spadef to do anything else, like handle Latios and Zam and Volcarona, that Reuniclus just escapes from its
Yeah.
pursuit, and then T-Tar gets hacked apart by spikes, and Reuniclus is going to heal, and you just do that a couple times. It's not even like a guessing game of, oh, do I Focus Blasted, Crunch Pursuit? No, just switch. Worst case, you just, eat a Pursuit for, 55? T-Tar needs... it's so bad that T-Tar needs Adamant
Sure.
and 88 attack to guarantee a 2 KO against Lefty's Reuniclus. And, yeah, so I think T-Tar... Yes, obviously T-Tar does something to Reuniclus, but it gets worn down. But it does something, yes.
Okay. Again, Kevin, in the concept in the concept of a complete team, if you're looking for a Pokemon that 1v1s Reuniclus reliably, you're unlikely to find it. There's nothing that beats every set. If Reuniclus gets a Calm Mind first, those things generally don't exist.
Well, which
In terms of a
is
complete
fine
team
theoretically.
and limiting opportunities and the things that annoy it, Latios is
They're
Granitar is there. Number 3 in usage, Excadrill. Once again, one of the best options. Ferrothorn, we literally just said, people that let their Reuniclus knowingly get knocked by Ferrothorn, that's a bad play. Guess what move Ferrothorn basically always uses?
yeah.
Knockoff. When it doesn't run knockoff, what does it often use? It uses Thunderwave. 5th in usage, Jirachi, obviously good matchup. 6th in usage, Landorus T, Earthquake chunks it for like 35-40%. That alone is is good enough to fish for crits in the end game.
I mean, I understand where we're going with this, but I'm just gonna keep saying the same thing, which is these Pokemon might all individually be okay, and together they should theoretically.
And Sword Dance sets are decent there. Keldio's the first one that we get to that it's actually like beginning to get into really negative territory. But even then, like a lot of Keldeo sets have tools for it. Be that Leftovers Taunt, Calm Mind Ghost, any Specs set are pretty good. The only ones that are bad here are going to be like Leftovers Toxic, right? on Keldeo.
Which are generally the best ones. Yeah. Oh, Jesus. Okay. Time to jump out and back in once again. And there we go. Have I figured it out?
Right, how far did we get?
Keldeo, and then I left and came back in, which generally seems to work. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
I think,
Yeah.
yeah.
What
Then you
you're
have Scizor, Alakazam, Rotom's a bad one, Starmie's not a great one, Encore Politoed, Reuniclus itself, Whirlwind Hippowdon, Thundurus, Garchomp, Jellicent. Every single Pokemon on this list, their best sets have something that annoys Reuniclus. And so my way of analyzing this is like, if you lose to Reuniclus with all of these options, some people would say that's evidence that the Pokemon is broken. I use it as evidence of like, you are not leveraging the options on your team well enough. Because between all these things that hit it for like 40% plus, Thunderwave, Knockoff, Taunt, Encore, Trick, Pursuit, Rapid Spin to help your other partners out, just abusing its lack of coverage between two moves, phasing with Hippowdon and Skarmory. Between all these things, if you are literally letting this Pokemon just get Calm Minds and win, like that screams to me that that's like you have a place to improve as a player, not the fact that this Pokemon is like absurd, because everything in the top 10 here is like really annoying for it.
I mean, I guess where we
and I say that as a Reuniclus user.
Where we differ then is that I don't think any of these things are so annoying as to really hinder it from doing its job. And I get the idea that everything is a little annoying, and together they, combine to make something that's really annoying, and then it should be thwarted theoretically.
Yeah.
But I just don't think that these options are robust enough against its overall assault. I find that they all get.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even. It's not even a matter of moveset. It's just a simple Calm Mind, Recover, Psyshock, Focus Blast. Pretty much everything, with the exception of Gliscor or something, is going to be overwhelmed, because again you can say, oh yes, all these little things are good into Reuniclus. Yes, they're good into Reuniclus, but then you look at all the little things that Reuniclus has going for it, and when you start pairing Reuniclus with those things, and I know even you mentioned, the part where you pair it with all these T-Wave users, that gets pretty disgusting. So when you start pairing Reuniclus with these things, these spikes, these knockoffs, these T-Waves, everything, that's when it really starts becoming overbearing. And I mean, the T-Wave option in particular, people were complaining about this a long time ago. But yeah, so what I think, I just said what I think, so I won't repeat myself. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going to agree to disagree on that, because I look down, as a user of Reuniclus very often, I look down that top 10 list of Pokemon, and I look at things that I need to seriously pivot around before I can even consider clicking Calm Mind with Reuniclus.
Mm.
And you're seeing it as things that are like 50-50 Reuniclus matchup, and I'm not going to reliably win.
I don't think that
I think that's just where
though is the thing. Like something like as simple as Encore Politoed is
I think
like, or even like the
sure, but you're not using just Encore Politoed. You're using Encore Politoed with a Thundurus that the defensive cores that support Reuniclus cannot reliably deal with.
They have Latios and Alakazam, and the whole thing goes out the window.
So I agree. If your team is literally... What's that?
As soon as that Reuniclus team has a Latios, then, forget getting anything done with Thundurus, and just remember that Latios is going to be bulldozing the entire team. And so it becomes a lot safer to throw Reuniclus out there, because you're not going all in on Reuniclus, but Reuniclus, again, with its regular partners, which is kind of the problem. Reuniclus and its regular partners, I'm saying it's not just the T-Waves and Spikes, but then the other Psychics it's being paired with.
I mean, okay, that's one way of looking at it, but like again, as someone that pilots these teams a lot, like I find among some of the worst matchups for those teams to be rain teams that really abuse the fact that Latios defensively is your only water resist.
Mm-hmm.
Like for those teams, Keldeo with Thundurus is like incredibly difficult to play against.
Yeah. I
Either of those with Scizor is incredibly difficult to play against.
I was messing around on the ladder recently with
Starmie, offensive Starmie is yeah.
I was messing around on the ladder recently just to, getting my feet wet. I was messing around with rain just to see, oh, maybe I'll overwhelm Reuniclus with rain. And the fact is, you cannot always keep hazards up, you cannot always keep hazards off, which is similarly horrible. And then, you have all this offense with Keldeo and Thundurus, and then defensively, you are just so helpless against Latios. Like, yeah, you might get them to sacrifice their Gliscor or whatever, and then Latios comes in, Zam comes in, and you are just dead because as nice as the idea is, oh, I'll spin, I'll keep the hazards off, then you are going to be overwhelmed by the fact that you have literally no switch into Alakazam. That your initial switch in to a Calm Minding Reuniclus is an Encore Politoed with, forget taking a little from Psyshock. Pair that with the rocks and spikes it's going to be dealing with. So Rain cannot always keep the hazards off, and then Reuniclus becomes a massive threat because it is going to pivot into the Politoed, half the time. And then, oh, well, I'll Scald it, I'll Encore it, oh, I Psyshocked, oh, I'm losing the Weather War because I took so much damage from hazards, and then T-Tars. I find it ridiculously overbearing. And that's just Rain, too. Reuniclus is thriving in other matchups as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't see it that way. I see some very outdated Rain structures, particularly those that are like quite tentacle reliant. Like really, really bad into those kind of teams. I think a lot of the Rains we see at the minute are like much more pinpointing that matchup as something they need to be good against and are successful at doing that. Because Pokemon like Starmie, Thundurus, Keldeo are like legitimately just threatening into the Reuniclus teams that we see currently. Again, it's Latios low water resist. Fine, if it's Reuniclus, Latios, Alakazam, that is different. That is something that matches up well in terrain.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's the whole pairing. And if you have Ferrothorn as the spiker too, instead of Skarmory, worse than other things, yeah, of course. But generally, if all you need from that slot is big spiking machine, it is going to get the job done. And then you even have more security against those rains because hello, second water resist. You're going to more capably match up into Starmie and Tentacruel to really make sure those hazards are staying. And I find it completely suffocating. So yeah, when I'm saying in these situations Reuniclus and friends, I do mean the case of Lottie, Zam, Reuniclus, because to me that is still the definitive Reuniclus structure and the gold standard that you have to take into account. Yes, some Reuniclus teams are not going to be as good into those kinds of things, but I'm talking specifically, the triple Psychic Assault plus hazards, because that is the best enabling of Reuniclus still to me. And yeah, and it just has everything, and that is what I find. It fully encapsulates every single Reuniclus supporting trait that really pushes it over the edge. The spikes, the other psychics, the T-Wave. My God, the T-Wave Latios supporting it. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking about completely different Reuniclus structures to you. Then that's maybe where we differ because I'm not thinking of triple psychic right now at all.
Are you thinking more like the Clefable, Latias, Bronzong stuff?
Yeah.
That stuff's
these are the ones to me that you'd consider more problematic. Because if we're talking triple psi, we're immediately not talking like the Thunderwave support stuff generally. You kind of can, but
you could because there's no reason why that Latios can't just slap T-Wave in its last slot. Draco, Surf, Recover, T-Wave. And, then it's off to the races. Then it's the same deal as it always is.
Yeah, but the reason you're not doing it is because the hyper offense matchup, right?
But now the hyper offense matchup is a lot more palatable when you aren't dealing with Cloyster anymore.
Yeah, but now you just lose to Scizor if it's not like Hidden Power Fire Latios or I don't know. You end up
people are running HP
if you're
Fire.
You end up in a situation where like your Alakazam needs to be both Hidden Power Fire for Scizor and Hidden Power Ice for.
I don't think it needs HP Ice at all. You deal with Dragonite.
I think if we're talking about like really really greedy triple psychic teams that like knowingly throw some matchups to like.
I don't think they're even throwing. You just run HP Fire every time.
Like I don't think they're.
I think you run HP Fire Zam every time, And then the rest, I mean, you can run HP Ice Reuniclus there if you really want, and then let the teammates handle whatever you're going to give up for it. God, I hope that went through.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
so.
Yes.
But again, yeah, this just isn't the kind of team that I'm thinking of when we talk about. Again, I'm trying to pull up SPL usage. I'm not sure there was really a Reuniclus Alakazam pairing
I mean,
used in the entirety of
eh,
SPL, but
yeah, people might not
yeah,
have
I don't.
used it, but
That's
again,
just not the kind of team that I consider right now.
to me, like the super slow, bulky stuff with the clef, and I mean, it's fine and everything, but it's so passive that yeah, of course, it's going to get eaten up by something like Thunderous. To me, Reuniclus is at its scariest when it's shutting you down, when it's choking you out through its teammates. It's not going to try and long game you every time. It can long game you, and what it does is it forces you into a long game because it's got these teammates that are shutting your window to go the distance with it. So, once you run into Latios and Zam alongside it, then it will just outlast you. Because they close the window very, very quickly because they force you to deal with it immediately. Rita goes, yeah, okay, before he gets some calm minds, it's not going to,
Yeah,
whatever. But with them, they're a lot more direct.
yeah,
So I don't,
yeah.
I
I
get
don't
where
think
you're
I
coming
have
from,
anything
though.
else to add on that. Like, yeah, I think I don't find that team at the moment to be problematic. I find it like defensively um, has a lot of questions. I just don't find
It was the team I was
that
running
to be
into
scary at all.
extremely commonly on the ladder when I was messing around with the rain stuff, and it was just absolutely suffocating. Like even when you run Mammothswine to improve your sand matchup or whatever, the fact is rain teams just are so tremendously defensively inept, and then you just for all the offense you want to muster, you will never out offense the whole Lottie Zam Reuniclus triumvirate, and it's yeah, incredibly frustrating actually. One of the reasons I think Rain is very 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 bad still, and because yes, it has some matchups which are just lights out, but in terms of consistency across the board, which in addition, that's why I also don't like the Hippo, Clef, Bronzong, Skarm stuff, because I mean that's also not what I would consider consistent to a lot of threats. I mean Thunderous, my God, Latios alone it uses Trick and you can't even stop it. So yeah, I think that kind of stuff is if that's being emblematic of Reuniclus, that's a flawed team style in and of itself. And the Reuniclus team style that I'm alluding to is to me still the standard that it brings out all the best of Reuniclus, whereas this kind of thing is trading a lot more efficiency generally, and able to or in order to really maximize its matchups against slower sand stuff. So again, in the direction of that whole maximized, super optimized war of attrition deal.
Yeah, sure. I think we're just coming at this from different directions,
Mm.
different sets we're thinking of, different teams we're thinking of.
I get the
Yeah,
idea. I do like
that's fine.
slower, longer games. I have nothing against them. I just find Reuniclus's presence in the team builder to be because yes, you are going to use things like T-Tar and T-Wave Latios and all that, but I find all these like little things that you can do to help against Reuniclus, I find them to be too little. Like it's a mild irritation, sure, but let's say you stay in and knock off Calm Mind Reuniclus with your Ferrothorn as it Calm Minds. Now you are switching into a +1/+1 Reuniclus with a team that probably doesn't switch into Reuniclus plus Hazards very well. So yes, on that turn, oh cool, I got rid of its lefties. Oh no, now I still have to deal with the Reuniclus, and I find the options to be subpar, consistently anyway.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think let's go around circles a bit. I personally find those options as the Reuniclus player like hurdles to overcome,
Hmm.
and better players will utilize them in a way that will stop me from winning with Reuniclus. Like I've had some games against some good players who absolutely wash me
Hmm.
with complete run of the mill teams just by using their resources better. and I think that's important. I think most teams have more than adequate ways of dealing with it. There are some exceptions. There are like, again, like you said, like really caricature like triple psychic teams are going to like roll over most Sans.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, most rain teams. I
Mm-hmm.
do think the Mammoth stuff, like I think Mammoth should be very favored into that. I think if you're losing a lot of games with Mammoth into triple psychic, there's something else happening there in my opinion. But
I don't know. I
um,
don't know because I was going through that matchup and I was using the Mamoswine and I was winning. I would say it was like a 50-50 split, and what I really didn't like was that it was pretty much it was all contingent on the Mamoswine, and sometimes even then because you were getting so ransacked by hazards. That's the biggest thing. It all really does come back to the hazards. I wish we would just go after spikes. I know we can, and this is just me being quixotic, but what I really didn't like was that you can say, oh, Mamoswine, yeah, but it's not getting the free opportunities past the early stages of the game. It is getting worn down. And with those limited switch-ins and the fact that when it is getting revenge killed by Latios or Reuniclus, you cannot switch into it safely. The options just are not there. Everything, like literally everything, drops to Alakazam. It is spectacularly destructive. And you pair that with Reuniclus, and you are geared for pretty much whatever matchup you might run into, one way or the other. So that's where I find the issue. I
sure, but like something we've discussed before is I don't think Rain has a right to always be good.
no, I agree.
Um,
I 100% agree there. But it's also not just rain. I find rain is just one example because again, Mamoswine isn't even a rain abuser. But if you just extend it to whatever kind of team, then I find that Reuniclus always being there, being too good at taking hits and surviving long game and being able to sweep you. I find that trio to be, you know, uh, to be disparate in how much it offers to a team because you could replace it with something like Mew, right, which is fast and can do a lot of really cool things. It's very, very bulky. It's got let's just call it equivalent roughly hit taking ability. So if you need that buffer against hyper offense or whatever, and it's a lot more immediately actively threatening into rain or something, but the fact
yeah,
that you cannot last. It is not nearly as immortal as Reuniclus, and that kind of immortality limits it not just in longer, more passive damage-fueled games, but also against more offensive teams, because that passive damage is going to knock it into range for things, for where that it otherwise might have been able to take on. So I find Mew, Latios, Zam. I mean, they all have their traits. Latios and Zam, you could argue are over the edge, especially Latios, of course. And even Latias, but with Reuniclus, it is too much of the full package. And I think once you introduce T Wave into the equation, it really just becomes outrageous borderline, because then yeah, I mean the thing we said already, then your options are really really limited. Um, yeah, basically that.
yeah. I guess if we want to just wrap this up, I think, but my sort of, I'll keep reiterating it. My point is that if you really look at things as like um, Latios and Reuniclus like, against the Pokemon 1v1 individually, like it kind of looks kind of dire, but like that's never the situation. And I think realistically, like all the good Pokemon in the tier have standard sets that like annoy Reuniclus already, and I think failure to use those options well is a pretty common issue. There are players better than me who are pro ban, obviously. Like Fakes is one. I think ABR actually might be as well. I don't know really the stances like everybody, but I think Finches do not ban currently.
Mm-hmm.
So there is like a mixture, but like look in terms of like the players who think it's like blatantly broken, I think that's flat out incorrect. I think if you're losing tons and tons and tons of games to Reuniclus, that's failure to use like resource as well.
I'm not saying blatantly
So
broken. I'm just
yeah,
saying
no,
broken.
I know. I'm just trying to counteract like the comments that will be incoming about how like it's a blatant Uber. Like it's not. Like most teams should be
No,
able to
it's
beat it,
not
right?
it's not sweep you
Um,
off your ass from turn one
no,
Uber, but
no.
I yeah, I mean like that's where we differ in that Like, yes, it's not in a vacuum. It's like accumulated little advantages against it. I just find that those little advantages wind up being so little that even when accumulated, they wind up not being sufficient. Um,
Yeah,
that's
that's
yeah.
yeah, that's fair enough.
But you know what? I guess I'm
Yeah,
gonna have to
you-
get out there on the ladder with Reuniclus and put it to the test.
I would recommend it as someone who's actually been trying to go for Rex
Yeah.
earlier in the week. Um, yeah, like it sort of reminds you the consistency issues that Reuniclus does have. It's
Hmm.
not an auto win Pokemon.
No, you should never expect it to be
It's
that.
no, it
It's
is it is it's difficult to pilot.
mm.
It's very rewarding to use well, and it's also rewarding to beat because
I mean, it's got a lot of appealing
it's
traits. I won't deny that. I like a lot of what it brings to the game. I just think it's
yeah.
too much for what it is.
Yeah, that's also fair enough.
Yeah.
Besides, we're just not gonna agree on this, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah. All right. So that is basically it. Do you have any final words to the audience?
Uh, no, I think I'm good.
Ban Reuniclus, that's what he's saying. Okay. All right. Thank you everyone for watching/listening. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one.